Yeah.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
And then it just dies. And then it goes blank because I haven't figured out how to kind of, tune it down, how to kind of ease into it. But yeah, that's our new intro. I'm excited for it. What's going on, guys? Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. I've got Johnny in the house. What's going on, Johnny? How you doing, man?
My guy, the beard's looking good, dude. I love it.
Oh, thanks, babe. Really appreciate that, man. I feel like it is coming real pretty. It's looking real nice. The beanie kind of adds to the lure of it as well. But yeah, I'm kind of excited for it. It does grow out really fast. So, I'm going to have to trim it up afterwards and after this November ends. And yeah, we'll see how good it looks after that. But anyway, we are here to not talk about beards today. We are actually here to talk about DFS and prop bets for you guys for this Thursday night game. That is right. We have the Cardinals and the Seahawks going head to head. Forget another epic matchup that actually went to overtime, in the past one that we saw in week 7. So normally there's like a lot of fantasy relevant options in this matchup with the Battle of the Birds. I mean, the Cardinals are taking off. Meanwhile, the Seahawks are kind of dipping down. And honestly, it's not looking pretty for the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, Dunbar, he's looking like he's going to be out. Griffin is looking like he's going to be out. And honestly, this team is just torn up from the ground up. So with that being said, we're going to be going through this DFS show, right? We're going to be doing prop bets. And of course, we have Johnny, who's going to be covering the prop bet side of things. Meanwhile, I will be covering the DFS. Now, in order to do our props, right, we actually have Thrive Fantasy coming on to actually sponsor us, thrivefantasy.com. Well, we got some noise going on in the background over there. So, Thrive Fantasy. ThriveFantasy.com is prop bets, right? You get about 20 different bets. You put them together. You pick out 10 or so to build up your lineups. Whichever one you end up going into, you pretty much compete up against 20 other people, 50 other people, depending on the size of the contest. And yeah, you end up going head to head with some other people. With that being said, if you guys go into ThriveFantasy.com and you put in anywhere from $20 to $50 and you use promo code CIRCLE, once again, that's promo code CIRCLE, they will actually match your deposit. So go check out thrivefantasy.com. Use promo code CIRCLE and get your deposit matched anywhere from $20 to $50 when you deposit. Once again, that's promo code CIRCLE. Now, let's go ahead and dive into this episode. Faith, I am freezing right now, by the way. She asked if I was cold in the group chat. I am freezing. That's why I'm wearing a sweatshirt and a beanie, and I have some hand warmers in my pocket as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive into this episode. And honestly, I'm going to be shocked. I'm going to be absolutely shocked if the Cardinals don't just attack the hell out of DJ Reed with both Griffin and Dunbar most likely being out. However, there is a little bit of an issue when you do attack DJ Reed. If you listen to the show, you know that I constantly bring up how, Christian Kirk belongs in the slot. And he's being used as this outside deep threat receiver. It's worked a couple times, but that's not his position. Well, here's the thing. Not only does Christian Kirk belong in the slot, so does DJ Reed, the guy that's actually covering him. So this matchup is actually okay. It's actually okay for Reed. Both of them are very quick. Both of them are very responsive. However, I know that Christian Kirk can still dominate this matchup overall. If they're one-on-one, Christian Kirk's going to spank that ass. Now, what I really want to see is them actually match it or switch it up a little bit, right? It's something that they never do. DeAndre Hopkins exclusively plays to the left. Meanwhile, Christian Kirk almost exclusively plays to the right. But I would love to see this switched up. going back and looking at their snap counts, right? DeAndre Hopkins actually has 18% more snaps than the second highest player when it comes to playing on the outside left-hand side of the field. Meanwhile, Christian Kirk has 28% more routes run on the outside right than the second highest player, which is Corey Davis, by the way. It makes sense because they do have the second highest pace of play in the NFL. So they want to get up to the line. They want to snap it. They want to try and find these mismatches right off the bat instead of trying to move guys around and shift this offense. So it makes sense. But I'm really, really hoping that they switch it up. So that way Hopkins can take advantage on the outside and out muscle that smaller DJ Reed, right? Win those jump balls. And essentially, if they do end up kind of switching up to an extent, you can see DeAndre Hopkins smashing this week, absolutely smashing. Now, is this something as to where you're actually attacking these DeAndre Hopkins? You're attacking, Christian Kirk. Like, what are you feeling with these over-unders?
I'm definitely going on the overs on both of them. Hopkins right now, based off our friends from Thrive, Hopkins is 89.5. Honestly, that does seem a little bit high because if you look at his last 4 games, Hopkins 73 yards, week 6 against Dallas, week 7 was 103, nice game. Then he was only 30 yards against Miami, and he had 127 last week, but obviously 55 of it came from that Hail Mary, amazing triple coverage catch, jump ball. You know what? I think against a weak Seattle defense, he's going to be able to exploit some matchups and definitely go over that 89.5. I think Hopkins could be in line for like $125, $135. And as his counterpart, Christian Kirk, for the most part, pretty good the last 4 or 5 weeks, and only at 48.5. One big play will get it done, and I think this is going to be another track meet type of game, just like that 37-34 Cardinals overtime victory about a month ago. So I'm over on both of those guys. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game.
Yeah, when we talk about the Legion of Boom, that doesn't exist anymore for Seattle. I mean, Arizona's actually, their defense is up and coming, but Seattle's defense is, just free-falling right now. Teams are figuring out how to beat that cover 3 defense. It's absolutely just falling apart. You have these intermediate route runners that Arizona has, and this is like the perfect recipe for disaster for the Seattle Seahawks defense. Now, pretty much every other team with their wide receivers has absolutely destroyed them, but I love the fact that you can take Kyler Murray and he can actually bring the middle linebackers kind of out of the play by threatening to run. Meanwhile, you can just hit him underneath over and over and over again. So it's going to be a big week for both Kirk and Hopkins, which is debatable. But the reality is with DFS, it's like, who can we actually play? Like, who can we actually see, actually putting up big time points? So I think that DeAndre Hopkins is obviously an answer for this, but Christian Kirk is a little bit more of a question mark for me. Now, we're sitting there, we're looking at DeAndre Hopkins and returning his value. And he's actually returned value 6 out of the 9 games so far he's played this year. And he's actually been rather expensive. This week is actually the 3rd cheapest he's ever been, which I'm assuming actually has to do with Kyler Murray and his price, along with, having DK Metcalf on the slate, Tyler Lockett, Russell Wilson. So he had to come down. Meanwhile, we have Murray, who's on the rise. He's actually the 3rd most expensive he's been. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to play DeAndre Hopkins, it's going to make it extremely tough for you to play DeAndre Hopkins, DK Metcalf, or Tyler Lockett. Meanwhile, you have Kyler Murray. It's going to make it tough to fit in Christian Kirk in this lineup and expect him to pay off. I understand. that you have such a weak defense over there in Seattle, but I'm not sold that Christian Kirk can actually produce enough to pay off his price, which is 16 or 17 fantasy points this week. Now, he's done it twice out of the past 4 weeks, I believe, but where are you sitting with Christian Kirk? What's his over-under? How are you feeling about him?
So Kirk's sitting at 48.5, which, honestly is not that much. I think one big shot, Kirk is, for the most part, the last month, he's getting these 40-plus yard catches. Kyler Murray's looking for him downfield. Hopkins is an absolute savage, so he's drawing a lot of these double teams, these bracket coverages, allowing Kirk to get down the field for a shot play. And like we just talked about, in a game against the Seattle where the majority of the consensus is it's going to be high scoring. So what does that mean? It means Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson are probably going to be throwing the ball a lot. And I think Kirk could be in line for about 7 targets. I think that 48.5 is definitely worth throwing a few bucks on, because there's a better than not chance that not only does he hit that over, but I think he can get in the end zone as well.
Yeah, like I said, for the over-unders, it makes sense. I would definitely go with the over for the majority of my plays. But when it comes to trying to fit him into your DFS lineup, I don't know if it's as efficient as you would hope for in terms of his price compared to what his actual output could be. Now, don't get me wrong. If I'm not playing Hopkins, I'm playing Christian Kirk. Like if I want to go with the Russell Wilson stack and stack DK Metcalf, it's really tough. And I'll talk about it here in a little bit. It's very tough to get in Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins into that matchup. So in that case scenario, I'll most likely slide Hopkins out and put in Christian Kirk at 7,400. Now, the guy that's really interesting to me is Fitzgerald, right? Larry Fitzgerald does not hit his bonus, very often, or does not hit his payoff very often. And honestly, it's primarily because of the fact that he sees these underneath targets time and time again. I don't even think he's had a touchdown so far in the year. So I'm not convinced that he's going to see a ton of volume. But at 4,400, after he saw 8 catches, last game, I think that he could very easily pay off in DFS. He saw plenty of coverage up against the linebackers, which I thought was very strange. He is coming out of the slot, but with the zone coverage that they play over there, he saw coverage up against the linebackers, which allowed him to get those 8 catches on the 8 targets. And by the way, if you get 8 receptions when he's only 4,400, you're only 1 point away from paying off, like the whole entire thing. Everything else after that is a bonus. Like you're already getting your ROI. So for me this week, and this is probably the first time I've said this in DFS in probably 4 or 5 years, at his price and the way that he can fit into your lineups, Larry Fitzgerald for me is actually a play this week. He's a play. Now, do they have a prop bet over there on thrivefantasy.com for Larry Fitzgerald?
You know what? They actually do. It's 35.5 right now. I mean, obviously that sounds like something that should be an over and automatic, but you just touched on it. Larry Fitzgerald's not been that great. He has a couple games where he hit that over. He had a couple, 54 yards against Miami. He had 62 yards against Seattle their last time out. But for me, it's one I'd probably stay away from. If you wanted to throw a little bit of your DFS money towards Fitzgerald, where maybe he can exploit some of that Seattle matchup. But the thing is, the Cardinals have been playing pretty well. They've been in every game. Their last time against Seattle was more of comeback mode. Now, that could easily be the case here, but to me, there's a lot of mouths to feed. Fitzgerald, somebody I'd probably fade. I don't think I would want anything to do with him in terms of the over-under prop bet.
Okay, that makes sense. And obviously, when you do prop bets and you do DFS, there's going to be stipulations. There's going to be things that scare you off of it. For me, I could see Larry Fitzgerald easily hitting 37.5 on 8 receptions because that's only 5 yards per reception. But he still has to see that volume in order to get there, and we don't know that's going to be the case. I mean, when we talk about some of that secondary, their weak spot is not. I repeat, is not actually in that slot unless the linebackers are actually covering these guys. So that's going to remain to be seen. But there is one guy that can make you millions in DFS this week, and he did it for you back like 5 or 6 weeks ago. He could do it again this week. And honestly, it's not something that I'm going to be like, hey, you got to roll about every single lineup, but you at least have to take a shot on him. When it comes to the wide receivers, Andy Isabella, he's in an excellent spot right now. Now, Cliff Kingsbury is kind of killing me, right? Because he's not playing him in the role that I want him to be played in, but it makes sense as to where he's going on the field when he played the Cardinals last week because of the cover 3 defense. He was parking himself about 5 or 6 yards, before the safety and about 5 or 6 yards after the middle linebacker. Now, would I rather have seen him actually try to burn, the outside cornerback on a deep route? Absolutely, I would have. Would have rather watched him do it 10 different times. Meanwhile, you run one of the tight ends up the middle to draw the safety from the middle of the field so he doesn't go into double coverage. But hey, it is what it is. I would like to see a shot downfield to Andy Isabella, but if he's not going to get used that way, I can't sit there and argue it, but I can look at his potential output if he can break a tackle or if he can beat one of those middle linebackers. Meanwhile, maybe the deep corner or the deep safety actually gets drawn to the other side of the field, leaving him with a wide open sideline run, very similar to what he did up against the 49ers last year when he had, I believe, an 80-yard reception for a touchdown. So I know that they haven't connected. I know that Kyler Murray just isn't accurate while targeting. Meanwhile, when he is accurate, Isabella has been dropping balls. But they both have like these perfect skill sets to be able to produce, and it's killing me that they're not connecting. Andy Isabella has the speed. Kyler Murray has the ability to scramble and let Andy Isabella try to get open. It is killing me. killing me that they're not meeting up. Meanwhile, we have Andy Isabella, right? He's sitting at 2K, at 2K. That's it. He's sitting at 2,000. If you could sit there and you can plug him in, right? All it's going to take is 4 fantasy points for it to pay off, and then everything after that is profit. Everything after that is bonus type money. So if you get like a 50-yard reception for a touchdown, just one, you're talking about ×6 multiplier on his value. That alone allows you to play like the studs if you're in there playing Andy Isabella for 2K. You can fit different lineups in there with DK Metcalf, with Hopkins, right? With Kyler Murray and with Russell Wilson. Now you still have to play another, kind of flyer or dart throw type guy. But if he gets you one big one, you're talking about being in the big time money. Now, I don't know if they go that deep on Thrive Fantasy with a guy like Andy Isabella, so you can let me know on that. But how do you feel about Andy Isabella and the prop bet, if they have one?
You know what? Yeah, no, you know what? They certainly do have a prop bet sitting at 16.5 yards. And honestly, you just mentioned it. All it takes is one shot for him. But the thing that worries me about Andy Isabella is he hasn't seen over 30 yards receiving since week 3 against the Lions. He doesn't have any more than 4 targets at any point this season. He hasn't had, and that was against that Lions game in week 3. So the fact is the volume is not there. 16.5 should be a smash, but we've seen it. He just doesn't get the volume. And when he does get his chances, he's not making the play. He's missing out on the opportunity. So that's another fade for me in terms of the prop bet. Like you said, for DFS, his price is very friendly, and all it takes is one shot for him to have a big return on investment. So DFS-wise, I would take a shot on him because that's the type of difference. A lot of times these DFS matchups come down to one player. Andy Isabella could be that difference maker if he gets that 50-yard touchdown. But for a prop bet, for me, it doesn't seem very lucrative, and it's something I'd want to stay off of.
That makes sense. That makes absolute perfect sense. The thing is with these prop bets and the way that Thrive actually sets it up, though, is it could once again be that one prop bet that you make that nobody else makes. So keep that in mind as well, because he actually would have had over 16 yards receiving last game, but Kyler Murray made a horrible pass, missed him by close to 6 or 7 yards and threw an interception on that play. He was wide open in the middle of the field. Kyler Murray just threw it above him and out to the right. It was actually really bizarre, but he would have crushed that 16 yards. He actually probably would have finished the game with like 27, I believe. So with that being said, Bentley, chill. Great, my dog's going wild. All right, I want you to go ahead and talk about Dan Arnold real quick. Dan Arnold.
You know something? Dan Arnold's actually a sneaky good tight end. He's a better athlete than people give him credit for. I think there's definitely some potential for him in the red zone because Kyler Murray, anything goes in the red zone. He loves running it. I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback that loves running in the red zone more than Kyler Murray. Like legit 15 rushing touchdowns is on the table for this guy. With that being said, though, a lot of times the Cardinals get down to the 1-2 yard line. They line him up heavy. Dan Arnold, a little play action rollout where Murray just hits him back corner of the end zone. He's definitely worth a shot for me. I mean, for his number this week at 17.5, that's actually a guy, if I'm throwing a dart, I actually like that probably the most out of like the Fitzgerald or the Andy Isabella shot in the darts, because I think Dan Arnold can actually have a decent volume where he could get a nice 20-yard catch. I mean, Seattle's defense, listen, they got good linebackers for Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, but I think Arnold can have a big play. I think people sleep on him, especially opposing defenses.
Yeah, for me, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Dan Arnold. And with the other tight ends, by the way, potentially being out this game, right? We have Daniels, who is potentially out. We have Max Williams, who's potentially out. We got to follow this injury report. But Dan Arnold, he doesn't block. He's a terrible blocker. He's pretty much like a big wide receiver. So if he is in the game, they are going to use him as a wide receiver. And with Dan Arnold at his price on DraftKings being $2,200, dude, all you're talking about is like 4 or 5 receptions for 20 yards and a touchdown. And he's paying off big time, just like how we talked about with Andy Isabella. So when we talked about earlier with DJ Reed, right? DJ Reed's 5'9", right? Dan Arnold is massive compared to him. If they throw him out as a wide receiver out wide up against DJ Reed, which they've done, and they use him in the red zone with Andy Isabella potentially hitting him on a fade, he's going to pay off his value right off the bat, off of catching one touchdown, and then everything else, like we talk about, is bonuses. So as a dart throw, once again, or a little bit more than a dart throw, to be honest with you, I actually really like Dan Arnold, and he's cheap enough to where he allows you to play some of these other studs, just like Andy Isabella.
You know what the funny thing about Dan Arnold is?
What?
He doesn't have one touchdown this year. And as we know, Thursday nights are wacky. Wouldn't it be a hell of a time for Dan Arnold to get his first tutter of the season tomorrow night?
It would make sense. I mean, he's pretty much almost been forgotten on this offense because this offensive line has not been able to block Kyler Murray or block for Kyler Murray. So they brought in Daniels, they brought in, Max Williams, who's now healthy, to actually help block and be almost like that sixth offensive lineman. So with that being said, Dan Arnold doesn't block, and so he's been kind of forgotten about. So we'll see what happens, with this matchup. And honestly, I feel like he could get in the end zone even more so than I feel like with Andy Isabella. So with the other tight ends being in question, I can't really bring up any kind of, prop bets or anything like that with them, but I do want to hop over to the running backs. In their last meetup, Chase Edmonds lined up in the slot about 25% of the snaps, which, by the way, isn't out of the ordinary. I mean, this is a normal type thing for him. He lines up on the outside. He racked up receptions, right? He racked up yards on the ground as well, and route to a great fantasy performance overall. I mean, we talk about this almost every single week, but you beat the Seahawks. You beat them with the running back in the air. They are very, very good up against running backs on the ground. I mean, we're talking about slightly over 3 yards per carry on the ground. Meanwhile, they struggle up against running backs in the air. They're constantly letting, big plays, constantly letting yards out there. And guess what? Chase Edmonds is that guy. So what is there a prop bet out there for Chase Edmonds for either, catches, yards, anything like that?
You know what? I love Chase Edmonds. You know why? It's not just because you guys share the same name and I'm a big Chase Vernon at Fantasy Football Intervention, but it's because I think he's the more talented back between he and Kenyon Drake. Honestly, I really do. He's a very talented pass catcher. He worked out very hard on over the last couple seasons. And when he's been given the RB1 role in Arizona the last couple of years, he proves like he can handle it. Now, he has a prop bet from our friends at Thrive, 42.5 rushing and receiving yards combined. To me, that is a smash.
Oh, God.
I think Chase Edmonds is going to get probably 15 touches. I think he's going to probably have about 38 to 40 rushing yards and 25 receiving yards. I wish he would get more involvement. He didn't do as much as we thought he would when Kenyon Drake was out a couple weeks ago, but I think it's an absolute smash. I'm taking the over. I think Edmonds could be in line for even like an 18 to 20 point DFS type of night. Love me Chase Edmonds.
Absolutely, and I do too. And he's relatively inexpensive. I believe he's at like 66 or 68. So he's somebody that I'm going to be trying to fit in my lineups, like trying to kind of force in there in quite a few of them, especially in the ones that I have Kyler Murray, because I do think he's going to end up with probably 6 or 7 receptions in this game. Now, Kenyon Drake, the other running back, right? I'm a little bit nervous about him. I don't want to play him this week, first off. He's going to need either a breakaway run, which, by the way, the Seahawks have only allowed 3 runs of over 20 yards so far this season, and no run longer than 32 yards. Then we have, he's either going to need multiple goal line carries, right? That or the breakaway run. Now, I will say that it makes me a little bit nervous because of the fact that the Seahawks have actually allowed 6 touchdowns on the ground to opposing running backs over the past 3 weeks. Although they haven't allowed a bunch of yards per carry, it's just teams are getting, up to the goal line with them, and they're just pounding the rock over and over and over again until they get it in. That's not really the Cardinals style. You talked about it earlier. Kyler Murray loves to run in the red zone. So, we saw it this past week where I believe he used 2 different RPOs inside the red zone and ended up running himself 4 touchdowns. This is not going to be the Kenyon Drake game. There's certain games where I like Kenyon Drake. There's certain games where I hate him. And this is one of those games where I am not feeling Kenyon Drake, and I still might play him in like one lineup just to make sure I don't miss out if he does get 2 touchdowns or something along those lines. But I don't see that really happening. I don't see the breakaway runs happening. I don't see that massive amount of goal line carries happening. I'm going to be fading Kenyon Drake, especially at his price. His price is absolutely insane. His price is through the roof, and it makes it almost impossible for you to play other studs in the receiving game if you're going to play Kenyon Drake. Is there a prop bet on Kenyon Drake over there?
Yeah, something, Kenyon Drake, me and you are on the same page with that. It's 47.5 rushing yards. That seems like a smash. But honestly, he hasn't been a guy that I think we can rely on. He had 100 yards against Buffalo last week. Great, so be it. But you hit the nail on the head. Seattle's defense is pretty good with not allowing long runs. That's probably because it's usually a shootout and everybody's always passing on them. But I'm probably staying off that Kenyon Drake. I love Chase Edmonds. So I usually don't like doing the same back in the two backs in the same backfield unless maybe it's like a Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt situation. So I'm probably off Kenyon Drake. The 47.5 should be a layup, but we can't take anything for granted with this guy. So I'm fading that one altogether.
Now, sitting here and looking at it, so I'm just going through their games right now. The last time they allowed 47 yards to a running back was... I'm still looking. Sorry. Still looking. Oh, Chase Edmonds got it in week 7. And then, Dalvin Cook got it the week before that. Outside of that, there's only been 2 weeks. 3 weeks total. 3 weeks where a running back got 47 yards on the ground up against Seattle. That is absolutely brutal. I mean, Seattle's run defense is really good. And although you are talking about shootouts and whatnot, still the yards per carry normally goes up in shootouts because they can run a bunch of draw plays and whatnot that'll bring that up. They're allowing 3.7 yards per carry to the running back position. And if you take out this past 3 weeks where these teams have literally just been pounding the rock up at the middle just because they've been in that green zone, as they call it, they've only allowed 3 touchdowns in the first 6 games of the season. So, I'm going to stay away from that one.
You know what's funny about Kenyon Drake, dude? Other than, he had 100 yards and 16 carries, seems very efficient. But aside from that, he had that one ridiculous pretty much BS run against Dallas, the 80-yard touchdown where the game was pretty much over. He's been terrible this year. He's been so inefficient, and he's not been a guy that you can rely on week to week. I think he's been a major bust this year. I did not love him with his ADP at all coming into the season, and he definitely for a weekly lineup that you want him on DFS or you want him in the over-under on the prop bet. I mean, dude, he's definitely been disappointing. So you touched on it. You hit the nail on the head. Definitely a guy that you might want to throw one lineup so you don't miss out, but he's not a guy that you can say, I think that 47.5 is going to happen for him on the over.
So speaking of running backs, I want to hop on to the other side of things. And guys, make sure you go check out thrivefantasy.com, thrivefantasy.com. Use promo code CIRCLE. Promo code CIRCLE. That way you can get your deposit maxed anywhere from $20 up to $50. But onto these running backs on the other side. Chris Carson, right, could be back, and we already know that Hyde is back. And the good news is that these two combined average over 5 yards per carry, and Hyde got in the end zone in their last matchup up against the Cardinals. Now, what's concerning for me is Carson and his snap count, if he is healthy. He could have enough snaps to kind of vulture, Hyde from actually having a high in production, but I don't think he's capable of putting up 17 plus fantasy points, which is what his 8,400 pricing would insinuate. So I think I'm going to be very similar in terms of ownership percentage when it comes to Drake and Chris Carson, if Chris Carson even plays. Now, it is a super tough situation to play. I will say that, but it could be a contrarian play as to where it could win you big time money because there are not going to be that many people playing him at 8,400. So I can understand if you want to throw him in one lineup. That's why I'm saying he'll be in similar ownership percentages as Kenyon Drake. But I think he's overall going to be a fade for me. Is there a Chris Carson over-under for Thrive Fantasy?
You know what? Unfortunately, because of all the injuries right now, the only Seahawks that have prop bets listed on Thrive is Russell Wilson, Greg Olsen, and Jason Myers. So because of the Tyler injury, that's going to impact all the receivers. Chris Carson's not playing, so that's going to impact or is not playing. I think he's going to play. So that impacts all the running backs. So it's literally just those 3 guys. We probably have to wait until we have an official designation if these guys are going to play or not. But I think Chris Carson's in for a solid night, maybe somewhere between 12 and 15 touches his first game back where he got hurt against Arizona a few weeks ago. I think Carson could be putting up somewhere between 70 total yards and a touchdown, maybe 2. We know how Pete Carroll loves to get Russell Wilson stat padding and get him to throw at the goal line. So hopefully – Carson can get in on the 1 or 2 yard line and just punch it right in. But Carson, to me, he is a high DFS price. But to me, like you said, you got to throw him in 1 or 2 lineups because he's a guy that's been scoring a lot of touchdowns this year. He's been very touchdown efficient. So 1 or even 2 scores is not off the table, even on limited carries.
Yeah, and the stat line you threw out with the 70 total yards and the 2 touchdowns, that puts him over what his value would be. So just slightly, but it would still put him over. Now, The guy that I really like here in this backfield is actually Hyde at 5,400. That's $3K less. It's what, 60% of the 8,400 or so, right around that range. So I don't really care if Hyde is chalk if Carson doesn't play. I'm still going to fit him into a lot of my lineups because he helps me play a lot of these other studs in here. So I do like Hyde. Obviously, there's not a stat line on Hyde, right? Or a chalk play, you said? Or I'm sorry, a Thrive fantasy play?
Yeah, nothing right now. It looks like Hyde is going to play, but it's obviously going to depend on Chris Carson's status. Also, the thing is, Alex Collins looks like he could get a decent allotment in some capacity. So it's very crowded back there. How you feeling with the addition of Alex Collins?
Well, Alex Collins actually got put back onto the practice squad again. So if that's the case where Carson doesn't play, Alex Collins might be activated again. But I only see that really happening if Travis Homer is also out, because their 3 running backs are good enough to roll out there, in this area. They're going to need more help with the defensive backs. They're going to need more help in special teams. And Alex Collins does not provide that. So I don't really see Alex Collins being activated unless Travis Homer is inactive. So DJ Dallas for me, if Travis Homer's out, is actually a bigger play than Alex Collins, because Alex Collins is just going to be relief there for Carlos Hyde. So DJ Dallas, meanwhile, is the pass catcher, and Carlos Hyde, he can catch okay, but he's not a pass catching back. Meanwhile, DJ Dallas can snag balls out of the air. He's absolutely insane with his hands. So, like with Homer, I hope that they hold him out, because of the fact that I want Dallas to be a thing, and I don't know if he's as much of a thing if Homer's in. But the Seahawks have had like this reputation for just running backs into the ground to the point where they can't play anymore. And I think they're finally kind of starting to learn that lesson, as, don't do that, because, we're talking about Chris Carson possibly being towards the end of his young career. Carlos Hyde is getting beat up and they're actually pulling him out. So I'm hoping that they pull out Travis Homer. And then, like you talked about, Alex Collins potentially being back in there. If he is, then I love DJ Dallas to actually rack up a whole bunch of catches over here and actually be a fantasy relevant option. I mean, DJ Dallas, I believe, is like 900 or so. So if DJ Dallas can go out there, right, and put up, 20 yards receiving on 4 receptions, you're already talking about it paying off and getting, plus some on that as well. I love Dallas as a dart throw as long as Carson and Travis Homer are both out. If they are not out, then I'll still play Dallas in like one lineup just in case, but that's going to be about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's honestly, it's all a toss-up. The injuries is going to determine a lot. We'll probably find more out, I would say, tomorrow afternoon. But, yeah, DJ Dallas is not a bad desperation play if you want to throw somebody for a very cheap option, assuming, like you said, Travis Homer's out or Chris Carson's out. But, yeah, I do like DJ Dallas as an option in that situation.
Yeah, and he has a great rapport with Russell Wilson as well. And, hey, it could be a play with Russell Wilson, right? Like, you can end up seeing there is a chance that the Seahawks actually go down because of all the injuries to their defense right now. Plus, Tyler Lockett could be out. So if the Seahawks end up going down, and being in a losing game script the entire game, you could see DJ Dallas rack up even close to 7, 8, maybe even 10 catches this game. It's very possible. It's not like we've seen the Seahawks in losing situations very often, but it does happen. And, speaking of losing situations, Russell Wilson's last game was absolutely brutal, but outside of last game, he's either gotten very close to paying off his value or he's blown it out of the water. So my major concern is that with Hyde healthy and potentially, Chris Carson healthy, they take the ball out of his hands a little bit more, try and get him to calm down a little bit because his past 2 games have not been good. And they go more back towards their 2018, 2019 run heavyish, type offense. I'm not saying that they're going to run it, 60% of the time or anything like they were before, but at least get it out of his hands a little bit more often and set up the play action fake and look for his efficiencies, potentially to increase. So my question is with Russell Wilson and DFS is, do I really want to sit there and pay up for Russell Wilson if I feel like this could be the corollary? I mean, what do I have to give up in order to play him? Like, how much do I have to end up, losing out on other guys, and how low do I have to pay down to? Because I know that I'm going to love to play Hopkins this week. I know that I'm going to want to play a ton of Kyler Murray this week, right? I can't play Russell Wilson and any one of his major pass catchers without paying all the way down to like 200. I can't play Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf. It's almost impossible to play him. So with Russell Wilson, you said that he did have a prop bet, correct?
He does. His over-under passing yards is 311.5. And one thing I do want to point out that it's still up in the air because things always change because it's out of our control, and especially in that region of the United States. The weather, it looks like there could be some rain, the wind swirling. So that's also something that's going to factor in. Obviously, that's going to depend on how we do our prop bets. But Wilson at 311.5, to me, I actually like that as an under because the Tyler Lockett status is still up in the air, which would put probably Patrick Peterson mostly on DK Metcalf. Not to mention, I don't feel like Wilson, like you said, they're not trying to have him throw as much. It might be a shootout game. And if it is, then you know what? He might go over. But I feel like a lot of his value and a lot of his points, he comes via the deep ball, but a lot of it is because he's getting in the red zone and he's just throwing touchdowns. Now, Wilson, I think, could have a solid game and pay off, but to me, the 311.5 is a little bit steep, even against an Arizona defense that's kind of regressing just a tad. For me, my opinion, I like Kyler Murray a little bit better in the DFS because especially with the rushing, he's always a threat to take it in, especially in the red zone.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, it's not impossible to get him in. Like you can play like Dan Arnold, Will Dissly, Isabella, etc., like in the bonus spot, but you can't play like Kyler Murray in a bonus spot or any one of these guys if you hope to play their main receivers as well. There is one guy that kind of gives you a little bit of a cheat code over there, and that's actually going to be Freddie Swain. Freddie Swain, right, in the bonus spot could actually work out because of his price. I believe he's priced down at like 1,200 or so. And honestly, with him coming in, if Lockett does miss time, by the way, Lockett would have to miss this game in order for him to be relevant. But he's been playing, I believe, something along the lines of 32% of his snaps in the slot so far this season. And we know that Byron Murphy started out the year real hot over there in the slot, but he has not been as good as of late. This is something as to where you could actually play Russell Wilson and, go with some of these cheaper guys and fade DK Metcalf hard. Now, do I want to fade Metcalf? No, I don't want to fade Metcalf. I don't want to fade Metcalf at all. But just keep in mind that Metcalf, right, got shut down by Patrick Peterson in week 7. He got shut down last week. People are starting to figure things out in order to keep him from, I guess, hitting his max potential, right? Going to Super Saiyan mode, whatever the hell you want to call it. So Metcalf only saw 5 targets when he faced the Cardinals. That could go up with Lockett potentially being out. That could end up rising significantly if they try and get him more involved in the game plan, even more so than they already do. I mean, he's only had like 1 week with, I believe, double-digit receptions. But yeah, I mean, where are you sitting with Metcalf? Let's just say that his prop bet's 100 yards. Or let's say 90 yards. Let's say 90 yards.
Well, it's not going to be 90 yards because that's very rare. His most that it went up to was last week at 79.5. So I'll probably bank him in at about 75. You know what? Whether Lockett plays or not, I'm as a gut feeling, I'm going to go over because I don't think teams are figuring him out. I think the only person figuring him out is Wilson that doesn't want to throw him. I don't care if he's covered. It doesn't matter who's covering him. This kid is an absolute animal. He put up a hundy on Tre'Davious White, and Trey White is probably much better corner right now than Patrick Peterson or Jalen Ramsey. The only person that can stop DK Metcalf is Russell Wilson. So yes, he got stymied last time out, but guess what? Russell Wilson had threw 2 very tight passes to Tyler Lockett in the first meeting when Patrick Peterson was all over him. The coverage almost couldn't be any better. So I think Metcalf is virtually matchup proof as long as he's getting targets. Wilson threw the ball 37 times last week, and Metcalf only got 4 targets, and they were pretty much all second half. Like, are you kidding me? DK Metcalf should be getting no less than 10 targets the way he's playing this year. He's an absolute savage. He's a top 3 receiver in 2020. No question about it.
Well, you just have to keep in mind, too, that he actually does struggle up against bigger, more physical cornerbacks. I mean, when we talk about Tre'Davious White, DK Metcalf is 9 inches taller than Tre'Davious White. And then when you add in the wingspan, it's not even like close. I mean, this is literally a professional guy up against a college guy, essentially, when it comes to that type of mindset. I mean, we're talking about just a monster of a human being up against one of the best cornerbacks in the league, but a guy that has proven to struggle up against bigger, more physical cornerbacks just because of his stature. And it sucks to say that because I'm a small guy myself. But just watching it, I mean, he couldn't do anything. He was draped all over him, but he still had probably close to 12 to 18 inches, of distance between his hand and the ball and where DK Metcalf was making the catch while he was draped all over him. So
well Metcalf actually he dropped Wilson overthrew it a tad down the left sideline. It was probably like a 35-yard completion. Maybe Metcalf could have stayed in bounds and took it all the way. And she should have came down with it. He had a step on Ramsey. It went through his fingertips. Yeah. But I mean, Peterson and Ramsey are 6 foot. They're not huge. They're not 6'3". So Tre'Davious White's what, 5'10"? Maybe
no, 5. No, he's way smaller than that.
Is he way smaller than that? I thought he was about 5'10".
He might be 5'10". I'll check it out in a second. But let's go ahead and talk about Patrick Peterson, though, because Patrick Peterson is probably one of the most gifted athletes, on the field, 5'11". And he is bigger.
5'11". Okay.
Yeah, so I believe his wingspan is actually 9 inches longer. Anyways, on to the point being, I don't have a problem fading Metcalf necessarily if you're trying to maximize the pricing when it comes to Metcalf because of his insane price. I believe he's up at like 10-4 or something along those lines. So when we sit there and we look at it, I actually love the idea of playing David Moore in this matchup up against Kirkpatrick and then picking either Freddie Swain, who we brought up over there in the slot, or one of the tight ends as like a dart throw. Moore hasn't had a full opportunity to shine yet, but he still contributes and produces at a high-end level. In fact, 3 out of the past 4 weeks, I believe he's over 15 fantasy points. Last time they faced off, this season, he's caught all but 7 targets, and 3 came in the game up against the Vikings, which were very inaccurate passes. So if we take that game out, he's actually 22 for 26 on 15.1 yards per reception. So he's not even catching balls underneath. He's catching intermediate to deep passes, and he's doing it at a very, very high clip. Not to mention the fact that he has 4 touchdowns. So he's catching a touchdown pass on almost 20% of his receptions. That's absolutely nuts. That is something that I want to capitalize on in a matchup where he could see almost all the snaps on the outside. He's not going to be coming off the field when they go to 2 tight end sets or 2 wide receiver sets when Tyler Lockett would normally slide to the outside. He could absolutely smash. Is there a comfortable line that you would feel with David Moore?
You know what? David Moore is a good one that you brought up. He's a guy that's slowly, very quietly becoming a bigger part of this offense. Russell Wilson, even with a full complement of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, he looks his way. He throws it down the field for him. So I definitely would feel comfortable taking a shot on David Moore because he's been paying a lot of dividends.
Well, yeah, I love David Moore, and I just love pairing him with either one of these, 2 smaller guys. And like we talked about, playing these cheaper options allow you to still move up and play some of the studs that you want to play. If you like the Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins, playing a David Moore with like a Greg Olsen on a run back would actually allow you to do this kind of stuff and still, I believe, get both quarterbacks in, if not close to it. So as for the tight ends, they are very game script dependent. It's actually really strange how Seattle runs it because they actually do have, they don't have a set tight end that always goes out and gets the plays called for him. Right? This is something as to where they're feeling out the game plan and they'll run out their tight ends on certain routes depending on the matchups. So when I sit there and I want to roll out like Hollister, I want to roll out Disley, that's like a dart throw. But when I looked into it, I did discover that Greg Olsen took 32 snaps as a slot/outside wide receiver compared to only 16 as a tight end this past week. Week 1 was actually the only week so far this season where Greg Olsen has had more snaps as a tight end than he has as a wide receiver. So it's something as to where Greg Olsen is typically coming in line as a tight end and then motioning out to a wide receiver, getting coverage up against linebackers and safeties, meanwhile being out in the open field. So the Cardinals defense, right, their rank up against the tight ends are very, very misleading. They're sitting there, I believe, 9th overall up against tight ends on DraftKings, but the reality is they've only faced 2 tight end ones this entire season. Just 2. All these other guys that are shutting down are scrubs. They got no business, being even in the conversation. So the Cardinals were the worst team up against the tight end last year. And although they could have improved slightly, I don't think that they made this giant jump to tight end, to defenses up against tight end at rank number 9. I like all 3 tight ends as start throws, but Greg Olsen could actually be in line for a massive game this week, especially with Tyler Lockett being out. And if Freddie Swain doesn't see a significant jump in snaps, we could see Greg Olsen kind of slide into that slot position. So I don't like Freddie Swain and Greg Olsen in the same lineup, but I like them equally when it comes to trying to match them up with like a David Moore or a Metcalf, type player when it comes to the pass catchers. So are you feeling any of these tight ends? Is there somebody that you kind of really stands out to you over on the Seattle side with the tight ends?
I mean, it's always worth it to throw a shot on Greg Olsen. He's sitting at 25.5 total yards for receiving. I mean, it really is a toss-up. He had 33 last week. The problem is he just doesn't get a ton of volume. I would probably take the shot on him if Tyler Lockett was to sit for the over at 25.5, just because I think he could be in for 5 targets. He catches, he's pretty reliable, maybe catches 3 of them for like 30 yards, which would hit his number. Nothing too crazy, but I think Greg Olsen could be in line for a slight uptick and get those 5 or 6 targets that we're talking about and deliver on his number at 25.5.
Yep, I like it. I'll take that and roll with it, man. Once again, guys, go check out thrivefantasy.com. Use promo code CIRCLE, and they will actually match your deposit from anywhere $20 up to $50. Listen, that's actually going to do it for us. So real quick, Johnny, let everybody know where they can find you.
Johnny Venezia, always on Twitter, Instagram at _JohnnyVTV, and on Instagram at JohnnyVTV in general. But Chase, you always do this to me. You always miss what I'm here for.
Oh, God.
The kicker, Jason Myers. Yeah, Daddy, let's go. 7.5 total points. I'm taking the over. I think he can bang out 2 field goals and a couple extra points. Blankenship delivered for us last week. Let's go, Jason Myers.
I'll take it. I like it. I like the pick, man. Jason Myers is actually going to be a play in some DFS lineups for me this week as well. I normally don't bring him up because it's tough to discuss, exactly where they're going to line up. But if there's an obvious play, I always like when you bring up the obvious plays.
And Chase, we always got to have you on every Tuesday, 7:30. My boys, me, JDF Sports. We have Fantasy Egos, myself, Fitz, Tyrell, talking about all that fantasy goodness. Guess what? It's down the stretch. Our boy Chase comes on, and we're ready to win you some leagues and some Scott-alls.
Fuck yeah, man. Let's do it. All right, guys, you guys can check out our content at @joinourcircle_, at @joinourcircle_. And, of course, you guys can find me at @FF_intervention on Twitter. Thank you guys for listening once again, and thank you for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. Oh, and don't forget to check out our episode tonight, 8 o'clock, Wednesday. It's going to be crazy. We got Ray GQ on with us. Later.
Ooh.